Good evening. Sorry for the delay. All right. I will call this meeting to order. ¿Hay alguien que necesita intérprete para la junta? Okay. This meeting is being recorded or broadcast. Images and sounds may be captured of those attending the meeting. First up, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Flores, will you lead us, please?
Please stand. Ready? Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Approval of agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We've got an agenda. General public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any item or any issues within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board that are not listed on this agenda. No action can be taken on an item not on the agenda at this time, but may be referred to the administration or put on a future agenda. Members of the public may also address the board on an agenda item before or during the board's consideration of that item. Do we have any cards tonight? Okay. Next, report of action taken in closed session. Okay, regarding readmission of students to schools maintained by the district, case 2018-08, on a motion by Trustee Paceno and seconded by Trustee Doyle, the board voted unanimously to readmit in case 2018-08. On case 2018-19, no action was taken. On case 2019-05, on a motion by Trustee Doyle and seconded by Trustee Paceno, the board voted unanimously to readmit in case 2019-05. And case 2019-32, on a motion by Trustee Good and seconded by Trustee Paceno, the board voted unanimously not to readmit in case 2019-32. And that concludes the report of action taken in closed session. Next, we come to the superintendent's report. Dr. Flores.
Thank you. Well, we've had a really busy 2 weeks since our last school board meeting, as I'm sure most people in the room have. But I'll go back to August 9th. The board president, vice president, and I meet monthly with the mayor and the city administrator. We had a very good meeting, spent most of our time talking about the impacts of the Garlic Festival shooting. It was kind of an emotional meeting, but it was good that we had a chance to kind of debrief afterwards, city and school districts. So I'm glad we had that chance. Between August 9th and the 15th, I conducted about 8 or 9 television interviews, made an interesting start to the school year. Again, a lot of them were talking to me about the Garlic Festival, the impact that it was having on the start of the school year. And, of course, I let them know all the things, as I shared at the last board meeting, all the things that we've been doing as a district to support our students and our families. And despite having 8 or 9 television interviews, we had a great start. So the school year started out very well. As I mentioned last time, we did some training for our staff the first day they returned. We had counselors at every site. But other than that, the year started out very smoothly. It was a very good start of the year. We have this wonderful relationship with Specialized Bikes at Solorzano that I've told you about. That's just a great relationship with Specialized Bikes. They provided 40 $1,000 bikes for our students with helmets and a lot of other equipment I recently learned through a grant through Specialized, and it's been a wonderful success at Solorzano. So I'm pleased to say that Specialized Foundation is now funding a grant for South Valley, and we've already received, I believe, are they in the warehouse? 40 bikes for South Valley. that they assemble themselves and bring over in a truck. And we're very excited about this. So we're getting the program off the ground. It's going to take us a little while. We've had a slow start, but we're really excited about having, and eventually Brownell will have it too. But because they're under construction, we decided to delay the program, which is all about bicycle safety for students and how to ride a bike, how to maintain a bike, how to behave on the road next to cars. It's a wonderful program. And so in a couple years, we'll have it at Brownell. Very excited about that. At the beginning of the year, I always like to sort of make the rounds and meet with every employee group. So, you know, I did it. I spoke to teachers, had an orientation there. I was invited by Artie to talk to the paras. In fact, several of us went over and talked to the paras at their back-to-school luncheon, and we appreciate that. We have had a lot of back-to-school events, so every member of cabinet and I attend 2 or 3 of those, and I was able to go last week to Glenview's kindergarten back-to-school. It's so cool to see kindergartners coming to school for the first time. So that was great. And then, of course, the 14th was the first day of school. Do we have that slide? Yes, it's up there. And I made it to, I think, seven schools. I usually try to get to 9 or 10, but thanks to all the television crews, I didn't make it. But I went to 7 schools, and I know Cabinet did about the same. So we were out there. We were out at all the school sites, and it went very well. The biggest challenge we've had this year is Solorzano's traffic. Again, these are our outfits. All of us have contributed time this week. In fact, there are about 5 of us in the room that have been there almost every day, helping with traffic. Why? Because the Christmas Hill Park is closed and Miller is closed. And normally about 300 families drop off from the Christmas Hill side to Solorzano. They can't do that now. So we have 900 cars coming in and out of less than a quarter of a mile road, in and out. And it just brought Santa Teresa to a stop the first few days. So thanks to Cheryl Galloway on the left, who's been the lead, and a lot of other people, Dan, Paul, I really appreciate all your efforts. We've each been out there directing traffic. And over the course of this 5 days, it has gotten so much better because more and more students are riding their bikes. More and more students are walking because we've encouraged them to pick up at the 3rd Street side. Today, I think we had over 200 students riding or walking. So it's really helped. Until the park and until Miller open, it's going to be a continuing challenge, but it's getting a lot better. And I really appreciate Alvaro at the pedestrian crosswalk. These 2 staff, a lot of people have been out there helping us, and it's getting better. We had our South County Youth Task Force meeting yesterday. Seems like a long time ago. And prior to that meeting, I had a conference call with the executive director to talk about some ideas that she has about streamlining our referral process. The South County Youth Task Force focuses on at-risk youth, particularly students who are at risk of going into gangs. And we've, I think, done a great job over now 10 years reducing gang activity in Gilroy. I'm always proud when I am able to report out at the meetings that we've had no gang problems in our district, and that's pretty much been the way I have not reported any gang problems in a long time for Gilroy, mainly because of all the efforts of this broad-based 40-person task force that is really focused on interventions for students before they get involved with gangs and get into trouble. So it's been a very effective task force. I have my upcoming fall visit starting for the middle school, so if you want to join me, please just let me know. Brownell's August 27th, South Valley September 4th, Solorzano August 5th. Did Solorzano August 5th? I was going to say, August 5th already happened. And then there's a number of upcoming events that are on your screen that you may want to attend. In fact, I believe we're all attending the Gavilan College event. What day is that? Anyone remember? September 7th? That we're all attending the 100-year celebration. So that's upcoming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this brings us to item 5, the consent agenda. What is the will of the board?
Move approval.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next, item 6A, update on the 2019 district enrollment and recommendation to close an elementary school. Dr. Flores.
Thank you. I'm going to say a few words of introduction because we do have people in the audience who haven't been at our prior meetings where we've discussed a possible school closure and we've discussed enrollment. So we've been talking about our declining enrollment for over a year. And in fact, at several meetings, we've presented charts displaying our decline. Currently, there are 26 districts in Santa Clara County out of 32 that are declining. And the Bay Area, 80% of the school districts are declining in the state. That's also true. The primary reason, well, there are several reasons for the decline, but the problem across the nation, we are at a 100-year low, I believe, in the nation on our birth rate, and about a 60-year low in California on our birth rate. And what that means is 5 years later after students are born, they show up in your kindergarten. And if birth rates are declining, it shows up in your kindergarten 5 years ago. So for 5 years, our kindergartens have been declining, and we showed the board this chart back in June. You have the whole packet, by the way, in your packet with your agenda that displays the birth rate decline in Santa Clara County and in our district and the nation. So now what we have is much smaller incoming kindergarten classes. In fact, you're going to see we just hit our all-time low with this year's incoming kindergarten. We dropped below 700. We have graduating classes in the 900s, and we have incoming classes now below 700. Anyone can do that math. Over the next 4 or 5 years, our elementary schools are going to decline by 300 to 500 more students. This year, our elementary schools have declined by 100 more students. So the decline has continued. And I think you'll recall that last year at the June 13th meeting, I specifically stated that we would come back to you today, August 22nd, after we saw our initial enrollment. We wanted to be sure that this really was a trend. So now we have 3 years of declining enrollment in our district. It's caught us just like it had the districts north of us before us. So now we have a real trend of declining enrollment. And as you'll see when Paul shows you a chart shortly, you'll see the cohorts for every grade level and the decline across the grade levels, which will obviously eventually hit middle school and high school. But right now it's hitting our elementary schools. So we started this discussion last October when we talked about last year's enrollment and we showed you what was happening with our enrollment. I recommended forming a committee called the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Closing a School. That committee started meeting in January. It met from January to May, and then we shared our report with you in June. That packet displays the number of meetings we had and the composition of the committee. So what we are here tonight to do is, the first part of this presentation is to give you an update on our enrollment. So you're going to see a lot of charts displaying our enrollment. And obviously we'll take questions now, or if you have questions before the next board meeting, we'll be happy to answer those. And then the second half of the report I will give, where I'm going to talk about specifically the committee's recommendation regarding closing a school. So the first half is to update you on our enrollment situation. And Alvaro Mesa, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, and Paul Winslow, our Assistant Superintendent for HR, will be handling this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. Good evening, Board. Good evening, President Pace and members of the Board and members of the public. I'll just recap what you're about to see just real quickly. I'll focus on school-by-school actual enrollment for the last couple of years and projections at a school level. And then Mr. Winslow will then focus on the active student enrollment, and you'll see the cohorts by grade levels, and we'll dive into a lot more of the specific information. And that's how we'll provide the information. So the last 3 years of actual enrollment, and I'll spend a little bit of time what this means because it's a specific point in time every single year. Enrollment obviously changes and is fluid. Opening day enrollment, you'll see in the next slides, changes, especially during the first few weeks. As we purge records, we're still enroll. And so that number tends to be really fluid the first few days of school, and we've been able to track that over the years. But the October enrollment is a specific and California Department of Ed date. It's the first Wednesday of every single year in October. And so that creates a snapshot in time that's consistent for us. And that's our projection point. So it's very different than the opening enrollment reports that we're showing you today. But nonetheless, we want to show both. The projection point, of course, is critical. And October enrollment as a benchmark for us, that's always going to be our official enrollment with CDE and with us as well. So you can see the layout here is elementary is here on the bottom. I wanted to kind of squeeze everything in there in one slide so it's just easier. Elementary is here on the bottom, so this is 16, 17 actual enrollment, and then of course 17, 18, 18, 19. These are set, these are actuals, and these are based on our projections. So you can see that from here to here, it's a consistent over 160 student drop, 168, and then another 161. So that's pretty steady. And we projected for 149 loss just in the elementary. So we projected it was going to be a little less than these 2 years, but significant, over 150 for sure, because the pattern was clear. Before 16, 17, it had been essentially stable, if not growing. So 17, 18 was the first year of decline, followed by another second year of decline. And then we're looking at 100 students less already this year, concentrated in the elementaries. Over here we have the middle schools. So again, similar data, similar points, same reference points, basically staying level at the same 2,500 or so. Among the three schools, Gilroy High and now Envision Academy, they're combined in the CBETS report. That's how the state groups them together. So we group them together here just to facilitate the comparison. And so you can see that the high schools have grown a little bit, but then decline. And then we were expecting a little bit of decline as well as those bubbles go through. So that's actual enrollment, school level, and projections. And I think that's how the starting point should be. And then we're going to focus on the next slides, elementary, opening day enrollments, projections, middle school, open enrollment projections, and high school, etc. So this is just the elementary schools. So the first few rows of data, columns of data, is the same thing that I just shared with you. So this right here is the same set of data that I shared with you just in the couple of slides. And this is August 14th, opening day enrollment. And you can see that the total there was 4663. And then it changes, right? Because we're cleaning up our data, we're enrolling new kids, and we're still going through that process. We're not done. And again, I want to emphasize that this data changes all the way through October, first Wednesday in October, and then we lock in that data. And then we have actually several months into February to certify that data. Not that we get to enroll more kids, it's that we clean up that first Wednesday in October data, we clean it up to make sure that in the transition of students moving, perhaps from one school to another, that they're only counted once, etc. And that's very important. And you'd be surprised, but it does take longer. Obviously longer for the middle schools and high schools. It's a little bit more complex because they're dealing with periods and when do we account for them, etc. For the elementaries, it's a little bit easier and smoother for us to get a count. But you can see opening the school day enrollment, 4,663, and then it varies. So just to look at the top one, for instance, ADB is pretty consistent at 441 essentially. And what the last two columns mean is 441 is yesterday's enrollment. I think it's the same for today at ADB. And so that means that they're 12. We projected them at 429, so they're 12 over what we projected. But 12 under from last year's actuals. So that's how you read that column. So overall, we expect it to be our actual enrollment at this point. But again, in October, we expect to be just shy of 4,600. Right now, we're at 4,646. That's 100, almost 100. It's 97 less than last year's actual number right here, 4,743. So again, I want to emphasize we're down 100 kids. At this point in time, with what we know, the numbers will continue to fluctuate and go up a little bit and down a little bit. But the takeaway is we're down again, 100 kids in the elementary grade level span. And if you add 100 to the decline that has started since 16-17, we're looking at 420 plus decline concentrated in the elementary grade level span. Paul will talk to you, we'll discuss how that looks in terms of grade level bubbles going forward in the cohort and what long-term impacts it has for our district moving forward. Here's the same slide, but focus on the middle schools cohort as we move on from 2,500. You can see it's pretty much leveled the last few years, and we are seeing a growth in the middle schools. We projected to have 2,567. We're sitting here as of yesterday at 2,634. So 67 higher than projected, just about 79 higher than last year. That's for the middle schools. And this is a little busy, but this is the high school up on top, and then the totals on the bottom. And I think your packet has a nice summary that has it all in one page. It's a little bit easier to put it on a paper than on a slide, so you can see the numbers. But the high schools have essentially stayed around 3,800, 3,700 or so, and that's what we had anticipated, 3,765 for the October projection point. We're actually right now we're at 3,827, a little bit of a bump. We expect this to change though, because again, the high schools and cleaning up that those perhaps duplicates that happen, it's a little bit more challenging to purge those records at a high school level than it is at an elementary, for instance. So this 13 up from last year could easily be down by next week, or it could double. We just don't know. This is fluid. So again, total enrollment, if you look at the bottom, this is just a total of the elementary, middle, and high school, 11,469 back in 16-17. We projected to be just shy of 11,000. We're at 11,100. So net, because of those fluid issues that we're having in the middle school and high school, we're just down 5 from the prior year. Obviously, that impacts from our projection point would be, but the takeaway here is where are we losing students and how is it going to move forward and impact us in the near future? 100 students in the elementary will mean that our footprint as a district will continue to shrink. The birth rates are, I believe, just shy of 800 in Gilroy in 2017. We get about 80% of those births, meaning actual students. So back when the birth rates were over 1,000, we had 800 students show up in kinder, and Paul will talk about that. And of course, that exponentially grows if we'll lose another 100 kids continuing in the elementary grade level span. And I think that's where I'll turn it over to Paul, and he'll walk you through what this means.
Thank you. Good evening, Board. Dr. Flores. This chart is what we use in HR for position control to make sure that we're staffing adequately. So I want to walk you through exactly what this chart represents. The first key thing is that this chart represents the ceiling of the potential students in the district at the moment. What I mean by that, these are students enrolled in school, but as Alvaro had mentioned, we're still purging students who we can't officially drop from the system at the moment because we haven't confirmed that they've either moved out of the city and we can't officially drop them from the enrolled portion. So this represents the maximum at the moment, and as Alvaro had mentioned, we spend the next few weeks cleaning up the data, calling parents, and typically if historical trending is the same as it's been the last couple of years, these numbers will drop every single day until we finally get to CBEDS. So what we're looking at is an immediate snapshot of the district at the moment of students in the system, and I want to highlight some key items. The bottom several rows indicate the enrollment at the moment at the elementary level. And the one huge number that jumps out in terms of position control is that kinder number. So for the first time, you can see we have a cohort of under 700 students. The critical point of that is every year that's going to just pummel through the elementary and continually lower the elementary cohorts. If you just did the math, 600 across the board, it's going to continually shrink and get a lot worse in terms of those schools being full. The other important aspect is that these numbers can't grow because children aren't born at the age of 5, right? So we know, based on the birth rate projections, you can take this data set, plot it directly on the birth rate projections, you're going to see the exact same trend. So as the birth rate goes down, enrollment goes down. So we know and we can estimate 5 years from now what cohort's going to look like in the kinder level based on births now. And so based on those projections, we're looking at several years based on the birth rate, and I know Alva will probably go over building projections, that we're more than likely going to have cohorts at every grade level in a few years under 700, which is going to make this footprint be, as Alvaro mentioned, 350, 400, 450 less students in the next couple of years. Now we have a new demographer. We were extremely conservative on staffing, and thank goodness we were, because we strategically held positions over the summer, anticipating our kinder enrollment would be, I think we estimated 687, and so we essentially hit it right on the head. So we were actually able to shed more staffing vacancies over the summer, anticipating that kinders would be even lower than anticipated. So we really hit it exactly where it needed to be, because within this entire picture, at the same time, we're attempting to reduce staffing and meeting the projected budget reductions that the board had already approved due to the funding model and the multi-year projection. So what I want to emphasize specifically in this chart is that 680 will move to first grade next year, more than likely, based on the projections, be replaced by 680. And so just multiply that, 5 years down the line, and those cohorts are going to shrink quite significantly.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And with respect to building, I think we're all familiar with where Las Animas sits around Santa Teresa corridor. Is completely surrounded by new development that wasn't there even 2 years ago. And for the last 2 years, Las Animas, actually from last year to from 07-08 to 2018-19, it actually dropped a little bit in enrollment. Despite that new housing. And this 743 is essentially flat at best. So it's surrounded by development, and our former demographer had projected that at this point it'd be 900. Another key point of worth noting is Elliott has Alexander Station, and that's brought in about 40 kids in total, net new, probably 21. Harvest Park, it's another new development, and these are affordable developments that are supposed to bring a lot more students, generate more students. Harvest Park has a net increase of 5 students, brought in total of 20 total. Not all 20 are ours, 5 are ours, new. So we're just seeing that that student generation isn't there. Younger folks, millennials, are not having kids. This was covered on the briefing, but it's worth mentioning. They're coming out of college with a lot of debt, perhaps, and making that conscious decision of not having families. Affordability of housing is obviously another key role, but Las Animas is something that we can point to and say, it's clearly surrounded by at least 200-300 homes, surrounded, and still growing, right, in terms of residential development, yet the footprint has not changed. Otherwise, that school will be in decline as well. And this is a little bit of a different data. This doesn't focus on the October's data that I started with. This is roughly a week after we opened school. What does that number look like? So this point today, give me back the same data, right, going back to 16, 17 at this point today. So it's not our official CBEDS enrollment that is first Wednesday in October. This is just about the same point in time going back a few years, and you can see the trend still holds. 5,000 students back in 16, 17. This point in time, of course, is 46, 46, significant drop. We'll just look at the total for this year alone. For this year alone, opening enrollment, total, right, across the district. We opened with 11,216. That number today, just 6 days, we lost 114 kids. So that's how fluid it is. So as much as we clean up the data, we suspect that the data is going to probably change again. And we just don't know where the needle's going to end. We just want to highlight that this is fluid information, and we recognize that it'll continue that way until we get to that October 1st point. And even then, we have several months after that to truly certify that with the Department of Ed.
Thank you, Alvaro. I don't know if you have any questions about enrollment before I talk about the committee recommendation.
Trustee Diaz.
So the 114 students, yeah, I just turned it on. Did they come forward and how did we confirm they're not there?
Yeah, so the way it's a very complicated process, but essentially what we do is we're enrolling kids last year, right? So as they're in the system, we're pumping them into our database, and we're anticipating they show up on day one. And we have a legal obligation to, if they don't show up, we just can't drop them. We have to make sure where they contacted. And so this is really all the hard work of the staffs at each site making those phone calls. So essentially the 114 represents 114 confirmed prior enrollees who have given us the necessary documentation to officially drop them. That number will increase, and I think that's the critical thing that Alvaro had mentioned, and that's why the CBEDS date is so important. We know that year after year, the trend is CBEDS is lower than these data points. So that's why I mentioned we're seeing the ceiling now. It'll typically drop. So,
And doing this for many years now, the high schools are where most of the action is, because it takes them a while to get the no-shows out. Yeah. We've directed them to drop the no-shows, but yet with high school, we have other steps we have to take because of the dropout data. So it takes a while. I've seen this go on for 2 or 3 weeks before we really know what our high school enrollment is. So we know that's going to drop. It always does, but we don't know by how much. And it'll over the next few weeks we'll find that out.
So I'm concerned about the use of demographers' data, because we've used that before, right? That's kind of like a thing that we do. But the same demographer, different demographer, but a demographer nonetheless, was the one that advises to buy up new property, build up new schools.
That was the prior demographer.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
It's still a demographer, though.
We have a new demographer.
Yeah.
And their projections have been very, very much on.
The problem with the future is it's very hard to predict.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Everybody was, we'd grown literally for 20 plus years as a district, and sometimes steeply. And we had all this new development. So in this demographer that we're talking about, I think he works for 16 districts in Santa Clara County, and had been right on until that trend changed with the kindergarten enrollment because of the birth rate. The plunge was much steeper than he projected. And so we were caught off guard a couple years ago. We did not expect to decline by that amount. Same thing last year. This year, we're ready for it.
So with this demographer, we don't know that yet either, right? Because it is the future.
The projections are very close. So it's a good first year.
Okay.
Demographers they use a lot of data, like student generation rate out of the developments, the kindergarten birth rate, and the cohort survival rate, which is how many students come back at a grade level. They use a lot of factors like that. And so it's still, they use a lot of actual numbers, but in the end, you can't always control what's happening in your environment. The biggest surprise after the birth rate decline across the nation was our student generation rate coming out of the developments. That has been the biggest surprise, as we used to, for a Glen Loma type development, every 2 homes would yield a child. Now it's every 3 homes is yielding a child, and it's scooting towards every 4 homes. The projects like Alexander Station and Cannery Row, we used to get 4 students out of 5 units. That's not happening at all now. We'll get 1 student out of 4 or 5 units. So those student generation rates have changed dramatically, and I don't know if a demographer could predict that.
The one thing that I've heard is that maybe they're stalled. They have changed, that it's dipped, but that as soon as that stall happens or stops, that it'll continue at the same pace it's gone before. And some of the charts kind of show that by 2025.
The hardest grade level to project is kinder, and they hit it right on the head. I mean, Mr. Winslow mentioned the projection was 687, and it came out to be 682. You can't get any closer than that. I mean, realistically speaking, that's pretty hitting it on the money.
The great thing about the past is it's pretty easy to predict. So these are all hard numbers of actual people, and we have the birth rate for the last couple years. So we know how many kids exist, right?
And we know the correlation between birth rate and kindergarten enrollment. It used to be about 87% of those births would show up in kindergarten 5 years later. Now we're down, I think we're actually maybe just under 80% of those births show up. So those are real numbers. Those are numbers they can plug into future, models to try to. It isn't an exact science, of course, because 100 parents could leave the district over the summer that didn't fit in any of those categories. So there's no way to know for sure what your enrollment's going to be, but the trends really help us. And, our trends have changed dramatically over the last 3 years.
The one thing that I'd be interested to see is like when we reacted. Obviously, 10 years ago, it was a certain number, and at some point, it started dropping, but we didn't really react to that or start thinking, oh, my gosh, we got to do something. At some point, it did, though. And what was that? And then conversely, when do we kick in again when the numbers start increasing again? Because I'd like to see that. Like, if we're going to do something, then I want to see the opposite reaction and action to that and a plan and be a little bit more formulaic about it.
In the packet from June, which is in your packet, and I don't know if we made copies of that, but we have our enrollment history from, what year was this, 1996-97 up to 2018-19. And as you can see in that packet, in answer to your question, there was a steep increase in our student enrollment up until about 2014-15 when it leveled off for a few years, and then it started down. So, in answer to your question, and, I'm not a professional demographer, so that's a science unto itself. But up until 3 or 4 years ago, our demographer was very close. This was our district, like many others, changed.
Yeah, I recall.
Data changed, and we're trying to adjust as quickly as we can to no longer being a district that's growing to a district that's declining.
Well, 2014, just really quick, to say those numbers, 2014 to 2018, they're actually pretty static.
Stable, yes.
Yeah.
For a few years there, they were stable.
Trustee Good.
One thing it's important to note, when all this was happening and when we were still going up, almost all the other districts around us were going down.
Oh.
So we were kind of like in a protective bubble.
Yeah.
And it took a while for it to catch up to Gilroy. But at the time, we thought, well, I guess it's not going to happen to us.
Yeah, I remember that.
It just took a little longer, that's all.
Yeah, it could have been that they were moving down here.
Yeah. For a while they were.
Yeah.
Well, they did for a long time.
Yeah.
I used to sit.
Relatively affordable for
Yeah.
its
Yeah, for a
unaffordability.
while. I used to sit in the superintendent's meeting. I wouldn't say anything out loud, but in my head I'd say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm
Those poor
Superintendent
suckers.
Gilroy." Now I can't do that. I'm in with the rest of them commiserating about declining enrollment.
And that still is my question, is like so it was pretty stable, 2014, 2018, 11,470, 400s, and then it dipped in 2018 by 200.
Yes.
And so that's like a 1%.
Yep.
So is that the threshold? Is that the number? Is 1% that we look for? And going forward, is it when it hits a 1%?
It's not a percentage that we use. It's
Okay.
based on those factors that I was outlining before. The demographers plug all those factors into their, computer, and they come up with a projection. So they're looking at, the birth rate, student generation rates, cohort survival, and a couple other factors I can't remember right now, but they plug that into their computer, and that's how they come up with the projection for the next year. And if you go back to the packet, they actually gave us projections going out to 2028.
Yep.
So
The number of empty classrooms is
Huge.
a big sign, right? And
Percentage.
so when classes start filling up, then we'll know
right.
maybe it's time to start thinking.
We have enough empty classrooms spread across the 8 elementary schools to house an elementary school right now.
And
That's
then
how
some.
many we have. And you're right, and then some.
And that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, students having elbow room and room to work around and stuff like that's not necessarily a bad thing. I have a son who left for college, and so that's 25% of my household.
Tell them what you think.
My daughter loves that extra room right there.
I understand your rationale when it comes to that, but unfortunately, when we drop by 200 students, what's the loss of revenue?
Yeah, we haven't talked about the fiscal impacts.
That's the problem. You can't continue to operate at the level you did when you had 500 more students because you've lost the ADA that goes with that 500 students. You can't make your budget. So we recommended to you, the board, major cuts over the last 2 years. We've cut $3 million over the last 2 years. And now we're projecting we're going to need to cut $1 to $2 million a year going forward. That's because of the lost revenue because of the decline in enrollment. That's our reality, unfortunately. Revenue in districts like ours is based on ADA. And when you lose students, you can't continue to operate like you have those 500 students.
Have you said what ADA was?
ADA is average daily attendance. So what we're showing on the last chart, why don't you go back to the active student chart. So on a daily basis, we have a certain number of students that show up. ADA is enrolled. ADA is a percentage of students that actually show up. So typically, on any day of the year, 95% of our students show up, and that's what we get funded on. And by the way, 95% is very good for a K-12 district. A lot of K-12 districts don't have an ADA level that high, and that's what we get funded on. So that is good news. Our students come to school for the most part every day. They have absences for illness, but we get paid on how many students actually showed up. So that's ADA, average daily attendance. Thank you.
Any further discussion, board? All right.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the committee's work. So again, we've had 4 or 5 board meetings over the last year where we've looked at data like this, and that's why I included the June 13th meeting data in the packet, because I knew we'd want to reference it. But we've talked to you, the board, and the public on many occasions now about our declining enrollment, our revenue issues because of the declining enrollment, and again, the belief that we can't continue to operate as we are and make our budget. So we formed the committee that I mentioned to you before. We met 5 times. The committee studied about 8 different criteria and looked at every single elementary school. And since the packets probably aren't out there, I'm going to read the 8 criteria that we used in the committee to analyze every one of the 8 elementary schools. And this criteria, by the way, is from the California Department of Education. They have a great website where they recommend districts follow these guidelines that we followed in our committee. So one of the criteria is there are neighboring schools to receive the students from that school. So in other words, if you close one of your schools, are there neighboring schools that could house those students? School enrollment is low. So obviously we looked at the 8 schools, we looked at their enrollment, we looked at many charts displaying the enrollment going back many years. So that was one of our factors. We looked at resident populations versus attending enrollment. What that means is you have students that live in your attendance area, but you may also have students that are not from your attendance area, and we're going to show you a chart in a minute that will display that. So you look at how many students actually live in the attendance area boundaries for this school, How many transfers in do you have from within the district? How many transfers in do you have from outside the district? How many special programs do you have that house students that don't live in your attendance area? So that was an important factor. We looked at how many general ed students are bused to the school, so we have charts that we looked at on that factor. We looked at the condition of the facility and the operational cost of that facility. So you have charts that you've already seen that shows the utility costs, for instance, for each of the elementary schools. We looked at the school's capacity for growth in the future. So that was one of our analysis points. And we looked at if we had a school closure, would it prevent keeping geographical neighborhoods together? And then finally, we looked at district programs or special ed programs that are housed at each of the schools. And you have the presentation from last June, and anyone here who would like it, I told ADB staff today I'm going to send them the whole packet. Actually, I gave you the whole packet before I left today, ADB staff. So these are the main factors that we considered in the committee, and we looked at each school, and then we discussed it at numerous meetings, what the data meant, and then eventually the committee came to a decision point about which school or schools to recommend to the board for consideration for closure. And I want to emphasize that the committee's recommendation really is if the board chooses to close the school, because that's your decision. The board, after analyzing all this data, has to make the decision, are we going to close the school or not? That's not something the committee can make. But what we asked the committee was, could you identify a school or schools for the board's consideration if there was a closure? So I'm going to say that the committee, if the board votes to close the school over the next couple meetings, the committee's recommendation is that it be Antonio Del Bono. And I want to show you some numbers about ADB that I think will help you understand. I could have shown you so many charts. We have a notebook of data that we looked at in the committee. But I'll just show you, and maybe Paul or Alvaro, you want to walk through this because a lot of those Paul put together. It's really important for us as we were looking at each of the schools to analyze what's their resident population.
I want to clarify that we approve a decision that is made in committee, because I certainly have not sat around thinking which school to close, nor have I been privy to any of the meetings actually.
Right.
So I kind of want to make that distinction, just kind of clear about that we will approve a decision. We don't decide to close. And
We decide whether or not
You
to
decide
close.
whether to close.
We do decide
In
that.
addition, we have a recommendation of
From the
which to
committee.
close if
And I
we
think
decide
there's a
that.
subtle distinction there. I
Specific distinction.
very, very specific distinction.
And say it again.
So that we approve a decision, not that we decide to
We
close.
do not approve a decision.
We do approve it.
No.
No.
There's a recommendation, not a decision.
decision's
They
been
do
made.
not make
We have
a
a
decision.
recommendation.
Then I have to say that I can't possibly make approve anything today because I haven't been privy
This
to
is not an
This
action
is not
item
an
today.
action
This
item.
is
Or
or
information.
even when that happens. I mean, it's been almost a year worth of meetings that I certainly have not had privy to, that I do want to state that I've asked to be part of, but haven't been to. And even as a wallflower, I've asked to be part of that, and I haven't. So to me, it's definitely pedantic, but it's subtle, and it's important for me, for the community to know that I did not sit there figuring out which school to close. I certainly was not there.
We didn't ask you to do that.
Yeah.
We asked your board representatives to do that.
Sure.
Your board president and your board vice president were on the committee as your representatives. Now we're presenting the data to you.
Yep.
We're sharing what the committee is recommending, and now it's in your court. It's the
To-
board's decision to
Whether or not.
decide whether to close the
To
school.
approve.
No.
No,
Okay.
it's your decision to decide whether to close the school. And that will either be at the next board meeting or the following board meeting. We'll see how this goes. I'm not rushing the board.
I also have a question about how was it that schools were zeroed in on really quick? As like I see it as like there's a lot of cost saving potential possibilities, facilities, the district offices,
Why don't we hear the report, and then we can
Yeah.
come back and discuss?
I don't know if we have other forums to do that. That's why I'm kind of mentioning it. I at least 6 months, 7 months worth of meetings that I haven't been part of, and I haven't been able to ask exactly those kind of questions.
Well, that's why it's at the board level now. Now it's at your level.
Yeah.
If there's information that we haven't provided, the committee deliberated. We couldn't have the kind of deliberations we had in the committee here. We would be here for hours. So I recommended the advisory committee. It was a very broad-based representative committee representing all the unions, parent groups, the board, community members. And that committee is saying to you, we've reviewed all the data that was presented to us, and they asked for a lot of data, by the way, that we didn't initially present. They had great questions. They were a great committee. They deliberated hard. And now they've made a recommendation that ADB be the school considered for closure. However, it's now at your level. This is now at your level. You need to ask the questions you need answered. If you don't have the information in front of you, you need to ask for it, and we will gladly provide it. If the board wants to have a study session, we can do that. We could go through more of the data. I gave you some of the data. This is all from committee meetings, the data that I gave you. If you need more data, we can do that. This is now at the board level.
Yeah,
We've
that's
done.
why I'm asking questions.
Sure, and you should. I welcome those. I encourage you to do that because we want you, as a board, to feel comfortable that you have enough data to eventually make this decision.
So for me, like I came from we live in a very binary world, zeros or ones. And when I see the committee named the Committee on Closing Schools, there can only be two outcomes there, yes or no.
No?
Maybe, delayed, but that's kind of,
It's, again, the if a school were to be closed, which school would it be?
yeah,
We're going to decide the if,
that's the binary.
and then right,
That's the binary portion.
correct. Nobody has made that decision yet.
Correct. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. That's the potential outcome that comes out of something named like this. It isn't let's have a cost-cutting effort committee or where can we
already done that.
brainstorm.
That's
We've
not
already-
the purpose of this committee. The board could.
It ultimately is
decide to
it's
have
to
a
save
committee
money,
on
right?
cost saving.
Ultimately, it's a
Yes,
cost
it
saving.
saves
So
money.
it could have easily been called that. But when you have a name like this, that is the only outcome that can happen is we close one or we don't.
We follow the California Department of Ed's guidelines that numerous districts in the state have followed.
I'm sure we
And this
do.
is one of their recommendations is to form an advisory committee, which is what we did.
Okay.
So if that process isn't working for you, then you have to bring it to the board level and say, I need to know this, I need to know that, I need more whatever.
Okay.
And at this level now, it's at your level.
Okay.
You know, the committee did a great job, and I commend every one of them. This is a very difficult task to consider a school closure. I know they put their hearts into it and that it was very difficult for them. But now, from my viewpoint, they've done their work. You can either accept their recommendation or you can deliberate with your fellow board members about if you want a different process and can convince the rest of the board to do that. We're here to support the board in making this difficult decision.
So the next two slides are just to provide a snapshot of what the committee had talked about. And I'll do the first slide and Alvaro can focus on the second slide. The first slide is really specific to special programs and students who are coming in through the overflow process or the inter-district process. And I'll go over each little chart so you understand what it means. The first one is the district offers a transitional kinder program. It's considered to be a quote-unquote special program because there's only 3 of the 8 elementaries that house it. So when we looked at that as a special program, we looked at what makes up in terms of residency arrangements of the students in those grades. So currently there's 43 students. 16 of those 43 will eventually stay at ADB as residents of the school, and the rest already have other schools that they will naturally go to through the residency enrollment process. So that's one of the things we looked at in terms of special programs. TK can be relocated to any of the other schools that don't have it, so we consider it to be a special program. There's also a severely handicapped program at the site. There are 14 students. We analyzed that in terms of the district's capacity to find a different location that meets the needs of those students. So that was something that the committee had talked about in terms of the criteria that the committee was looking at. This current year, we're also overflowing into ADB. And what that means is we have some schools that have reached residency capacity, and so we have to find other locations for those students to go to. So those students could naturally go back to the resident schools if the overflow were reversed. So eight students right now it's actually, there's an error, it's not TK, it's Kinder. So 8 of the Kinders right now at ADB are overflow students. And then we look at what are called inter-district transfers.
I'm sorry, Paul. Should
Yes.
it be a 9 on the grand total down there?
Correct, yeah, that data point. So the third little chart should be 8 Kinder, 1 second grader with a total of 9.
Thank you.
So we were trying to provide an idea of overflow, and this is only the overflow for this current year. So giving you an idea of the composition of the school. The final chart is inter-district transfers. Those are students outside of the Gilroy Unified School District, for whatever reason, have their children in our schools, and it is the school district's prerogative to put those students where we have room. So we always try to accommodate parents, but those 8 students also could be relocated underneath the umbrella of the inter-district procedures adopted by the board. So that's what those 4 charts represent, just to provide a brief snapshot of what the school currently looks like as it relates to the criteria that the committee had discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. And the other slide is looking at it more globally, at the composition of the students at Antonio del Bono. Just split them up into different buckets, resident students and non-resident students. We know that we have special programs there, so what does that look like? 312 students are resident and reside within the ADB boundary. So this is right off of Decision Insight website, our new demographer and our new website. It does lag a little bit to sync into Aries data. So you'll see that Decision Insight has 445 students there. That sync just didn't happen, but their total enrollment is 441. So it's pretty close, pretty safe to assume that nothing materially would change this graph. So this is ADB's boundary. So that's where these 312 students are residing within the boundary at Antonio del Bono. And these are the other 133 students that currently attend ADB but are not in the boundary of ADB. So you can see Rutgers students here. A couple of them are Luigi, Las Animas. They're really all over spread out. So 1 in 3 are outside of Antonio del Bono's boundary. And for the purposes of information, the grade levels are listed there, the breakout. But the highlight is there's about 312 students this year that are residing and do attend ADB. And then 133 are spread around the other boundaries already.
Okay.
How does that percentage compare to the other schools? Like it's about 70%.
It's pretty similar.
Yeah.
When you do have TK, obviously that's a factor.
Right.
And as Mr. Winslow mentioned, TK could be, at any one of our elementaries.
So that's all the information we wanted to share tonight. We hope by the end of your discussion that you will let us know what information you need for the next board meeting so that you can continue this discussion about a possible school closure.
Some additional data that I'd like is age of the facilities.
Age?
Yeah. Is it one? I mean, from what I know, ADB is one of our newer ones, one of our newer facilities. The other factor that I didn't see was distance to all the other schools
From ADB?
from ADB or any other. If it's elementaries that we're targeting, then elementaries is what I would be looking at, like the elementary in relation to all the other schools. It could be an average of distance is fine. It's something that I did informally, and it was kind of eye-opening because looking at it 2 different ways, actually, with one way you do it, like every school is within 2 miles of each other, and you add another school, and all of a sudden the average blows out to almost doubles it, actually, to 3.7 miles or something like that as an average. But it's an interesting number. And if we're trying to promote environmentally conscious safety, safe routes to school, all this stuff, then it really comes into play.
And that's a matrix of, as the crow flies, distance between each flagpole?
No, literally Google Maps put map up a direction from ADB, in this case, ADB to Brownell, ADB to Las Animas, ADB to, so kind of the idea that people would be traveling from one school to the other for whatever reason, whether it be facilities, schools, school teachers, students on bikes, whatever. So definitely not as a crow flies, but as a route that you would take.
Well, one thing that, if the board approves a school closure, one thing that there will be many things that we would need to do over the course of the next 6 to 8 months. But obviously, we would be looking, to your point, of which are the closest schools and which schools have room. So, for instance, Luigi and Rucker border ADB, as you can see, and Rod Kelly, for that matter. Rod Kelly's full, has no room. But Luigi has, I wrote it down earlier, I think 11 classrooms that could house students, and Rucker has 5. So when you look at which schools are adjacent to ADB, let's say if that was a school that was closed, those two would be immediately adjacent. And I don't know the mileage, but we certainly could give that to you at the next meeting, what the mileage would be from ADB to Luigi or ADB to Rucker, which is up Monterey. Is that your question?
It's even broader than that. It kind of helps with long-term planning. But if you look at the distance between, literally do a map of line from each school to each school, and you'll
From
see
each elementary school to each elementary?
Yeah, the one that I did was each school to every school in a district. But it could easily be done from elementaries. But it makes more sense to do the elementaries to all the other schools, because then you could compare that.
Yeah, because this is our elementary attendance boundaries right here. You're looking at it, so you can see where we don't have all the students plotted.
It's interesting because it affects, like, if you have, we've had multiple kids in the district where we had to go from Las Animas, drop off over to South Valley, over to Christopher,
Yes.
And so independent of the student going to that school, it makes a difference what's the worst case scenario, quote unquote, for traveling.
I lived it. It was Los Animas to Rucker.
Yeah.
Yes. But we would be, again, if the board decides to close the school and it's ADB, our first task is where are those students going to go, which is why this chart on the left is really important, because we need to look. The 113 can be housed anywhere. The 312 are the resident students that need to go to Luigi or Rucker because they're the closest schools that have space. So I don't know if that fits into your question. I'm not sure I understand it. Am I missing that?
I sent a chart over once, a matrix of the different mileage, and I think that would kind of help it look at that.
But we wouldn't be recommending, for instance, sending ADB students down to Los Animas.
No, no, but you would.
That's too far.
Well, what is but those schools remain in the district, so there's a potential now for people to travel between those just from its mere existence, whether it's facilities, whether it's a parent, whether it's a counselor, whether it's police department, that they have to do those same routes as well. All of a sudden, those become the furthest out distance that they can go to, or they could potentially travel to.
Okay.
Dr. Flores, could you talk about process? Say we decide to close the school. When does it happen?
It would be next fall. It would be August 2020. Hard to say that. And again, consulting with other districts and the California Department of Ed, it takes about 6 to 8 months to make this happen, minimally, because as you can imagine, there are a lot of steps, like how many students and which students would go to the schools that have room adjacent to this ADB. Then we have to figure out staffing. I had some good questions today from the staff. How are we going to decide which staff go where? And, that's a big process, so we want to work closely with the union to figure that out. There's a lot of contractual language, but obviously we want to have a close partnership on that part of it. There's a whole host of issues: cafeteria, transportation, where are we going to house the special ed class, where are we going to house the TK. There's just a whole lot of decisions that have to be made over the next 6 months. And obviously communications with staff, parents, consulting with our partners at the city to see what impacts there might be. So it's a very long process, but that would start immediately after the board made the decision. And we would be working very hard on that to implement it as well as we can, because we want this to go smoothly if this is a decision of the board.
Thank you. Trustee Munshi?
If we close the school, what's the plan to involve families? Because there are families that leave early in the morning and may not be able to drop off their students. Is there a plan to get any input from families about their convenience and how will they get their children to school?
Great question. I met with ADB staff today briefly. I felt like it was important they know about this discussion in advance. I'm going back Monday afternoon to their staff meeting to talk to them more about this issue and all the data that we have. We're going to meet with parents Thursday night for an initial meeting with parents before they're back to school, and we'll take it from there, because I don't know, I can't anticipate their questions and concerns until I hear them. So the three of us are going over and doing a presentation for the parents, and we'll start from there. We'll learn, I'm sure, of special cases. There will be some concerns, I'm sure, but we're going to listen to what they have to say, and we can report back to you at the next board meeting about that.
Thank you.
Vice President Good?
Dr. Flores, do we still have copies of those binders that were built over the 5 months of closing committee meetings?
I have mine.
It would, if it would be possible to make a complete copy of that.
Sure.
And get it to Trustee Diaz. I think a lot of the questions you've asked have already been looked at by the committee.
Yeah, sure.
For example, the school's age and what the costs are and so forth. And I think you're going to see some interesting facts in there, and it may answer some of your questions.
Okay.
Yeah, there's numerous charts in there, and the committee asked just great questions, things that really helped us move this process along. So, for instance, one of the charts is utilities, and it actually was a pretty big surprise to all of us to see the cost of operating our buildings, and surprisingly, ADB came out on the top as the most expensive elementary school. The reasons for that could relate to the design, the interior hallways probably are more expensive to heat and cool. We don't know the answer to that. And then there were schools like Rucker that have very low utility costs. So that's one example of of one of the points on our list of what we needed to consider as we talked about this possibility. So we'd be happy to, if the whole board would like that, we'd be happy to make you two already have it, but we could make it for the 5 of you if you'd like that.
Sure.
Trustee Paceno?
I don't want us to lose sight of a couple of things. One, about 87% of our budget is in personnel. So when we're looking at cutting, I think we are very, very conscious that we don't want to go there if we don't have to. So I appreciate the demographer was accurate in his 687 kinders, and we ended up with 682. So that goes to our staffing, which is, I think, a real plus. And the second thing is, for the last 2 years, we have looked at and have cut $3.5 million outside of this. So it's not like we're looking at closing a school as our first line of cuts. This has been about the third or fourth line. And if I'm not mistaken, Alvaro, 3 years ago, first of all, historically, seabeds has usually come in higher than the first day of school, if I'm not mistaken. And 3 years ago, for the first time, or 4 years ago, it was lower than the first day of school. And we were kind of wondering, gee, is that an anomaly? And then it happened again the second year. And it had never happen before. So that with the lower birth rate really was the red flag for all of us. Certainly was for me as a board member.
Absolutely right, Trustee Paceno. We used to grow 2% from opening day to
Exactly.
CBETs for years.
Yes, forever.
For years.
I was just talking to a former administrator, and he said to me, well, you grow 2%. That's exactly what he said. And I said, well, interestingly enough, seabeds, we are lower. And he said, what? He says, that's never happened. And I said, that's right. It hasn't ever happened, and that's the world we're living in. And it's like, our whole world has been turned upside down. So we are dealing with things that we've never dealt with before. But we end, item 6B is the budget development calendar, which I assume we will again be looking at ways to cut if we can and continue to look at our budget to see what we can take out of that. So it's not a one-shot deal closing the school, unfortunately.
Trustee
Which is why I say, go to Sacramento. When you're 41st in the nation in per pupil spending, this is what happens. And it's very, very frustrating. So, okay, enough of my rant.
I have more of a clarifying question. I'm sure it's already been answered. If we have to close a school, what we're looking at it is the over $700,000. We're not looking at reducing any staffing or making any other cuts, at least for now, at least for this year, right?
$750,000 represents pretty much the overhead. I mean, the staff will move with the students. We're not going to be reducing the teaching staff, but the overhead, meaning administration, clerical, the custodial, and the utilities, those are all on a chart that Alvaro gave you in the past. So that's roughly what we think we would save. Additionally, I should mention to everybody, as I've said at other meetings, my recommendation, staff's recommendation, is that if we close the school, then we immediately start the process of looking at leasing that building to generate revenue. So it's a two-parter. It's a two-parter, not just closing the school to save on the cost, but then lease the building to generate revenue. Lots of districts have done that in our county, in many counties, to generate revenue, ongoing stream of revenue.
And if we choose not to close a school, then we have to look at reducing some cuts somewhere else, whether it's in staffing or a program, because ultimately, just like our budget at home, the $750,000 has to come from somewhere.
Yes.
So then we would have to consider
More cuts.
cuts in either staffing or programs.
Yeah, and I've said this to you before. It's totally the board's decision. Staff will implement whatever you decide. If you decide to close the school, we'll do our best to make that happen. If you don't decide to close the school, then we're going to do what we've done before. We're going to come to you and recommend $2 million in cuts again next year and the following year. And we did that for 5 years during the recession years. We cut $20 million. It was very painful. We've cut a lot of staff. We cut a lot of programs. It was very difficult during those years because we don't have a lot of fluff in our budget. 87% of it is designated for staff and benefits, salary and benefits. So if we're not closing a school as one way to help reduce the expenditures and hopefully generate revenue, then we're going to be looking at making cuts. It's just that we need the reduction in our costs somewhere.
Which makes, as a board, it makes it really hard for us. While on one hand, we're looking at closing the school, which impacts families and staff and the community. There's a sense of ownership. But then on the other hand, we are burdened with the task of reducing force, which is also not an easy decision. And I think maybe it's a reminder to myself that we are faced with two very difficult choices. Mm-hmm. So,
At least two.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's...
Yes. As I said to the ADB staff today, I wish we weren't having this discussion. I sincerely wish we didn't have to put all the options on the table, but I don't think we'd be doing our job if we didn't at least put it forward as an option. Again, the board has to make the decision. Do we want to do it or do we want to make the big cuts? And we'll make it work, whatever you decide.
Trustee Paceno?
It's It's hard for me to say, to look at 50 empty elementary classrooms and not at least look at closing a school as an option. And I'll just say it out there. For me, it's the lesser of the two evils is closing a school as opposed to cutting personnel. I would much rather close a school. I know that's hard, trust me. But cutting personnel is even more difficult. So it's sort of like, do you want to cut off your left arm or your right arm? You know, but
There's a regeneration.
yeah, I wish there was a
Read Spider-Man. I know that doesn't work out.
But actually, that brings up another thing. Again, we tend to think binary. We tend to think we either lay off or we close schools. And we tend to look at it, we're working with a fixed pool of money, but we can also grow that pool of money. And that's something that I haven't seen. And that's where that creativity comes into play, is like, who's actively working? Just like we have people who want to give money. Lady Gaga gave us money recently. But who's applying for grants? Who's growing that pot of money so that we don't have to do this? And that takes work. That takes creativity. And they do it in private schools. Private schools have grant committees. They have people who actively seek out monies, do fundraisers, that kind of stuff. We tend to put that back on our teachers. Our teachers do that. Our students do that. They all do that individually, but we're not taking on that role as an entity, as a global entity, to do that. And that would be interesting to me.
The only comment I have about that is fundraising is great. We had a foundation in our district, and they raised less than $100,000 over about 5 to 7 years. So we haven't had great experience with that. And furthermore, you can't use grant funds for ongoing expenses, which is the
personnel.
Majority of our budget is ongoing personnel cost.
Trustee Fayek?
So, running a nonprofit myself, grants are one-time funds usually,
Yep.
and it is very difficult to run a school, run a district, depending on grants. And then I agree with Trustee Paceno. For me, to cut staff, which are so important to our student success, and then to cut programs for students that really need these programs that we have, I think that's I think closing a school is definitely the lesser of two evils. And then my comment, too, is, so are we looking at making a decision by October?
Yes. We really need the time to implement this. We're already kind of behind schedule based on the California Department of Ed's recommendation. They really recommend you take a year just for implementing the decision. So we'll be pushing hard. We can do it. We've talked a lot already. But we need October to June to make this happen.
And unfortunately, with declining enrollment, it's not an or. I think it's an and, right? We have ongoing budget problems as our budget shrinks. Yeah. Trustee Paceno.
Trustee Diaz somebody brought up the idea of a study session. Do we as a board feel we need a study session for this item?
That's up to the board.
I personally don't need it.
I don't either, but
Okay.
50 empty classrooms, that part's not rocket science to me.
I want to qualify that for the public. We have these discussions over and over. We have 50 classrooms in the district at 8 elementary schools that could be used to house regular classrooms. Now, sites don't keep them empty. I just went over this with 2 principals today. They have, storage in one classroom, a parent club in a classroom. So they're not all empty. You saw our chart. A lot of them are empty. I heard that from 2 principals today. And the rest they use for whatever they want to use them for. But they can house regular classrooms and have in the past. All of them have been used for regular classrooms when we were at our peak.
When push comes to shove, the important thing is to educate the children.
We have 50 of them where you can put classrooms.
So I have other questions, like is there a formula to reopen? Like if it were to close?
Good question.
Like is it, and tied to that is like if we do lease, what kind of terms are those? And It's
Lots of
Specific
money.
who the renter is.
Yeah,
No, not necessarily that. It's more like, how are we bound to that? Like if it's a 5-year lease and we grow in 3 years,
There's a process we have to follow by Ed Code,
Yeah,
by the way,
I would
and
imagine.
most of it's done in closed session. It's a negotiation process that we will do with, of course, attorneys and, experts. We're not the experts, but I know you wanted to weigh in on that.
The good news is we're in control.
Yeah.
So we decide what the terms are. We decide what the contract says. We decide what the exit strategy is. And it would be my preference, assuming that we did close the school and we did lease it out, that there be a 1-year escape clause. You could have a 5-year lease and it could have terms. However, if you have a 1-year escape clause, we have increasing enrollment. We need the school. We need the school because, again, we're not in the business of leasing property. We're in the business of educating
Being
students.
landlords, yeah.
So we need to be able to have reasonable access to those facilities if we need them. So bottom line is we could do whatever we want.
And other districts have done it, so we certainly could consult with them, ask who their property advisors were, who the legal counsel was, so we can learn from other districts that are already doing it.
is there a cost associated with closing and a cost associated with opening? Reopening?
I would say yes, but I don't know what the answer to that is right now. In a prior district, before I was there, the district had closed a building and converted it to another purpose, and it cost. But we're not converting this.
Yeah.
We would pass that on to whoever leased the building.
Yeah.
So let's say we leased it to a business and they need to change the layout. That would be part of our negotiations. If it's a school, maybe there aren't costs to convert, but we shouldn't bear those costs. And as we've done in prior contracts with outside agencies, we would expect them to return it to its original condition when they return it to us.
Trustee Good?
The other thing with the lease is we would obviously have something like a triple net lease, so they'd be required to maintain it and keep all the upkeep.
Yep.
The alternative to that, to just keeping it and not selling it, is a building that's not in use starts decaying almost immediately. So that would be a benefit to us as well, and a reduction in cost should we need to open a school there again.
Is there an idea of what that revenue would be for leases?
No idea. We could check with other districts, but
Yeah.
it's going to be specific to Gilroy.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're not going to get what a Cupertino gets probably for leasing a building. So it's, that's all part of the process, which would start with probably an RFP, request for proposals from any interested agencies or schools, and then we'll know then what people, and we can get an assessment of our own of what it's probably the value of leasing it is.
Trustee Fye?
And then we as a board can decide who
Absolutely.
who goes in and who doesn't.
Totally in control.
It's our choice.
Definitely.
Yeah, our decision.
And we were kind of in a hurry to make a decision, but with the renewed governor's budget, does that buy us time at all? Is it the same pool of money that it's essentially the same amount, like a
We're losing 100 kids every year in the elementary. The governor's budget is always going to be funded on actual daily attendance.
Oh, yeah, to clarify, I was talking about the PERS reduction that gives us like close to $1 million.
So the multi-year I shared with you previously in the previous board meeting incorporated all that revenue, and it still included $1 million cuts in the subsequent years. And the trend will change. I'd be the first to be happy about it, don't get me wrong. But we've already seen 100 decline in the elementary. Over 420 student drop in the last 4 years is a pretty clear indication it's going to continue. The birth rates aren't going to change. As Mr. Winslow said, we could just effectively take the birth rates of going back to 2017, take 80% of that and plug it into our kinder projections. And so
But can I add to that? Because maybe I'm wrong, Enrique, but was your question the additional revenue we received from the governor and
the PERS
state?
reduction? Yeah.
That's one-time money.
Yeah.
That's not ongoing revenue.
Sure.
I want to make that point also. So you saw it in the multi-year projection, the impact.
Mm-hmm.
So it's already in there. We showed that to you last time.
It slowed the increase. It didn't
Yeah.
decrease it. It slowed the increase.
Well, it decreased it for a year, right? So for 1 year,
It's above where it was 1 year.
And it's
still higher.
temporary until it
Less
becomes-
than it was going to be.
So for the benefit of the public, the pension obligations that the district has to pay for every dollar that we pay out an employee is on a scale going upwards every single year. So from last year to this year, the pensions for PERS and STIRS, we're going to increase effectively by 2%. And what the governor did is effectively cut it by 1%. So we're still spending over $1 million in pension obligations annually. He just reduced that. He dropped that. But it's only a one-time relief. And he was very clear about that.
We've
Over
talked
2
some
years, isn't it?
about the number of students.
Over
2 years?
one time spread over 2 years. Thank you.
We've talked about the number of students. Is there a rule of thumb? How much do we get per student?
This year's 10,000.
10,000. So 100 student loss. That's
And that's average. It's obviously funded by grade level, so K3, middle, and high school, but that's an obvious average number.
any further discussion?
I'd like to emphasize, at the June 13th meeting, I'm sure you'll recall that I asked if you had questions, please send them in. I don't think I got any. So if you have questions, and it was the end of the year, so that's understandable. But if you have questions after tonight's board meeting or thoughts that you want us to know, please send those in right away so that we can address them by the next board meeting. And at the next board meeting, we'll be looking to the board to give us some direction.
Thank you. I wish we weren't here.
Me too. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. All right, moving to item 6B,
May I ask-
approval.
Can we take a 2-minute?
We are going to take a
recess?
2-minute recess. Hey, we're back. I'm going to exert a little executive privilege.
Yes.
So we're going to move the COC up. Thank you for being here this evening.
Yes,
Sorry
we're
for
sorry for
the
the
long
time.
meeting. But first,
Yeah, you know what? Melanie reminded me when I introduced the new principals, I introduced 4 because Michael Kelly was not here yet. Oh. So he's here. So Michael is our new Luigi principal, doing a great job. We're really happy to have him on board. And you would know he's only been here, what, a month or so in the district?
Too much longer than that.
Yes. So they moved here from, it starts with an I.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
From Scott Air Force Base, which is about 30 miles outside of St. Louis.
Totally off.
So, I mean, from cornfields to beaches, like, it's been lovely. I mean, honestly, the turnout, the family turnout at Luigi especially, is just amazing.
Yeah.
I feel completely blessed. And I know you weren't there last night at our back to school night, but I said, Dr. Flores and the board, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to work with, our kids and our families, because I've noticed that there's something special here that I haven't really encountered on the East Coast when I worked outside DC, and even in the heartland when I was in, St. Louis area. People here genuinely, not only do they care about their kids, of course everybody cares about their kids' education, but they're like really in it.
Yeah.
And whether you want that help or not. But that's something special about the clientele that we have and just the community at large. And seeing that on a day-to-day, it makes it easy to realize why the community has been able to pull together so closely, so quickly after recent events. So you guys have been doing amazing work, and it really shows. So I do realize why this is such a difficult decision to make on behalf of the board, because it is going to be an impact for a lot of those families who have been in those areas for generations.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to Gilroy. Appreciate it. Looking forward to working with you. It sounds like you're off to a great start, so
Yes.
keep at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we release you now.
He was on his way out the door and had Melanie go after him.
Welcome. Good to see you.
She used to teach at Luigi. Oh, okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you.
Thank you for answering all my questions over time.
All right. This brings us to item 7A, Citizens Oversight Committee report on Measure P and Measure E. Welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Flores, President Pace, board members. As you know, every year, while we have active bonds, general obligation bonds, we have a Citizens Oversight Committee, and this year our Citizens Oversight Committee report will be presented to you by Jay Menchaca, and I'll turn it over to him right now.
Good evening, board. As Paul said, my name is Jay Menchaca, and I'm here to submit the Citizen Oversight Committee report for bond measures E and P. They're submitted on behalf of the members, and I want to get their names in here. Jane Howard, Don Rainey, David Silva, Clint Zollinger, its chair, Dr. Matuzak, and myself. Since you already have the reports and they've already been made available online, I'm just going to, and for the sake of brevity, quickly synthesize and summarize them here. Both reports identify Proposition 39 and Assembly Bill 1908 as the legal authority for the formation of these committees, the accountability guidelines for bond spending, as well as a mandate to provide these periodic briefings. In accordance with these requirements, Measure P COC was formed in May 2009 as a result of passage of Bond Measure P in November 2008, and Measure E COC was formed in May 2016 as a result of passage of Bond Measure E in November of 2016. The committee is tasked with ensuring that bond funds are used for the construction related to school facilities, furnishing and equipping of school facilities, and/or the acquisition or lease of real property for school facilities. Our submitted reports identify specific expenditures, which I won't go into. They're there before you now, that took place through the 2018-19 fiscal year, which they're there for your review, and also a list of projects already approved by the board, which I'm sure you're all well aware. As a graduate of Brownell myself, I'm really excited about that project. Many, many moons ago. Since our last report in February of 2018, the committee has continued to meet periodically to review these expenditures as they relate to both bond measures and continue to receive regular project updates. These efforts confirm, to the best of our ability, that the use of bond funds are consistent and in compliance with bond language. As further assurance, comprehensive independent third-party audits were completed as to both bonds by James Marta Company CPAs, resulting in the same opinion. Before concluding, I just wanted to extend the committee's gratitude to the attentive staff that's assigned to us. They have made our task easier and a more pleasant one. They are Natalie Martinez and her predecessor, Lucy Huerta, Alvaro Mesa, Anna O'Connor, Paul Nadeau, and his predecessor, Jim Bombachi. Thank you for your attention and the opportunity to so serve.
We really appreciate, those are very important committees. I started on one before I got on this board, so good. But thank you for making sure that the public's money is being spent well, and that's an important part of this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well and appropriately.
Appropriately, yes.
Great. Thanks for
Thank you.
staying so late.
All right.
You have to take action.
Do we take action? This is an information item, so thank you for the report. Okay, now we are going to pop back to item 6B, approval of budget development calendar for fiscal year 2020-21. Mr. Meza.
Thank you, President Pace. As you know, the budget development calendar needs to be approved so that it allows us staff to start spinning our wheels and develop a budget for the 2021 fiscal year that really looks at fiscal stability and fiscal solvency and really looks at the budget on a high level first before we even get the governor's budget in January, and it may revise, et cetera, and start honing in on the district's needs, and in this case, our future cuts that we need to make. So this is a planning tool. It's really a guide. We're here August 22nd. We gave you an opening enrollment report. Not every possible meeting is going to be here. It's just highlights. So if we do decide to have obviously a study session in the future, we'll pop that in. So this is just a guide. So when can you expect the key benchmark reports? First interim, December 12th. In the LCAP budget survey, it's going to be key. And similar to last year, our cabinet team will work closely with all the bargaining units to develop this survey. We suspect that the survey from last year can be a starting point, and then we'll refine that, working with the three unions, refine that a little bit and get that out sometime in mid-October. The last, and you know this, from January to June, really the organizational board meeting in December identifies the specific dates of those January to June meetings. So the best that I can do at this point is just say first board meeting in February, second board meeting in February, et cetera. But we will have the second interim financial report at the second meeting in March because we have to. It's by Ed Code. A draft of the LCAP sometime in April. A report of the May revision, of course, which will govern a lot of our assumptions, to Trustee Diaz's earliest point on what the governor's doing on the budget, et cetera, those global factors that affect us and every other district in California, and then narrowing in on our local issues, of course, in the multi-year projection. A public hearing on the first June meeting, and then ultimately seeking an action by the board on the LCAP and the budget in the second meeting in June.
Any questions or comments? Thank you. Nice calendar. Oh, we need to approve this.
Yes, that would be terrific.
I will entertain a motion.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? Okay. Hey, we've got a nice calendar. Next, C, monthly district cash flow update. Hello.
Hi. And it's not Kimberly Smith.
It is not.
No. Good evening, Dr. Flores and members of the board. My name's Irma Argueta, and I'm presenting on behalf of Kimberly Smith tonight, the district's monthly cash flow. And my item's information only.
Thank you. Remind me that at the end.
Here, I'd like to bring you up to date on the general fund cash balances and provide you with some information. We are still currently in the process of closing the books for the 18-19 school year. On the cash flow report, you will see the July's revenue alone. We began with a little over $3 million, and disbursements totaled a little over $2.5 million. The district did not go out to obtain a tax revenue anticipation note, also known as the TRAN, this year, which is great news, since if necessary, we can do internal borrowing. As you will see, part of the $2.5 million in expenditures belongs to the salary for both certificated and classified employees, which also includes the total benefits for both. That is a little over $1.7 million, or 69%. Our ending cash balance is a little over $23.2 million. And here is the next slide, which is a different way of looking at it, and can see how we have July there. Any questions?
Any questions?
I just have one question. I don't know if you know, but does it affect your ending balance on how staff is paid, if they're paid by 10 months or 12 months?
It includes both. The July payroll includes both the July 10th payroll, which is our supplemental payroll, and our end of the month payroll. You're welcome.
I'm curious why, December is higher than, it's like $1 million higher than November.
This year, well, their projections shot out.
Okay.
For the school year. So this is just our July actuals, which will show you exactly what was hit on the budget there.
I guess in December, does something different happen, or do we hire people for Christmas?
No, no. We just it could be also just because we're at that mid-year point where we receive time claims in from teachers and staff, classified staff at that point. Christmas time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. This is an information item.
Yes.
Now we are up to item 7B, monthly maintenance and facilities update. Mr. Nato and Mr. McAuliffe.
Ooh, I like the color.
Give me anything in orange?
No more orange. They're freaking me out. Good evening once again. This is an informational item. Let's see, we're going to move directly into facilities. Items that facilities is working on right now is, first and foremost, any of you traveling or working around the Solorzano area may have noticed today or yesterday, the dirt mound on Club Drive has gotten a little haircut and will continue to get a haircut for the next 3 to 4 days. We're taking down that hill. That hill is actually what they call DTS clean fill or DTSC clean fill. It's already been certified and we own it, so it's really helped us out in speeding up some of the processes over at Brownell. So we're working with the contractors to actually move a lot of that for the grading purposes of Brownell. So that's going to get moved in. Some more will be moved later. So yeah, you'll see some of that hill in action. We are working with the contractors not to impede our traffic work, because that would be catastrophic. So they're all very well aware of it. So yeah, that should be taking place over the next week completely, but yes, over the next four days. Let's see. You may have also noticed Brownell is starting up some of the preliminary work. We've got all the fencing up, some excavation, some of the preliminary stuff. We're talking asphalt excavation. The garden, the existing garden was pulled out, so we're really prepping that ground. And hopefully our calendars are clear on the 11th of September to kind of see where we're at and where we're going. We're going to do a little kickoff on that date. Let's see. Third, we have the Gilroy High School pool has just come out of DSA, so we are currently bidding that project. So I hope to be bringing a contract to you on the second board meeting of September for your approval, and we should be able to start, depending on the contractor's schedule, October 1st with that project. And we currently have the Gilroy High School pool in play, so it's completely usable for the month of September.
Okay. Trustee Doyle has a question.
What is our budget to rebuild that pool?
Millions and millions. It's 5.8, I believe. 5.8.
Thank you.
Let's see. And finally, the Gilroy High School portables, we are working with an architect to get those down. So that project is actually bigger than we anticipated. We have some utilities that we have to work around. However, our goal is to actually get the portables out of there as soon as possible. So we're trying to segment that project so we can get the portables out. We'll put in some temp fencing, and then we'll finish out that work probably after the rainy season. It just depends on how the rain works with us. But that should be a fairly easy job once the rain has passed.
I'm sorry. The portables would be after the rain?
No, we're anticipating getting the portables down as soon as possible, and that way we can work on the utilities through the rainy season, and then we'll do a lot of the flat work, concrete, and finish
for
work.
Superintendents who are interested in that, like what is as soon as possible? Is that
as soon as possible?
September, October, November?
We are actually hoping for September. Really has to. We have to work with the principal to find out how quickly we can get them down. So we're bidding that out right now.
Great.
So yeah, those are the variables. We need to find a contractor that can do it over the weekend, so we're not impeding student work. Get them down and get that project kind of underway. So yes, I am, and I'm really hoping for September. I think we've got them almost cleared out. We have a few more elements to get out of those rooms, but then, yeah, the demo work should happen almost immediately.
If it's still in there, it's trash.
Hey, that's, we're putting signs up to that effect.
Yeah, you might want to tell the Gilroy High principal that his boss really wants them out of there ASAP.
Yeah, really.
Will do. With that, I will hand it over to Mr. Dan.
I have a question.
That one.
Paul, we have a question.
Oh, we have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the pool, if you start in October, when do you expect it to be finished?
It really does depend on which contractor ends up getting that job. They will give us a timeline. We are anticipating with most contractors, we've given ourselves 12 months. We're anticipating having it done by June 30th of 2020. So that's
But for anyone listening, 12 months.
12 months. 12 months is what DSA is generally scheduling or seeing. A lot of the contractors are anticipating. In fact, Julio up at Eastside Union had a pool very much the same scale, and they finished in 9 months. And it's almost identical, peninsulas and everything.
Under promise, over deliver.
Yes.
So.
12 months. Next October.
Good evening, Dr. Flores, President Pace, and School Board. I have a maintenance update of our summer projects for you this evening. I apologize, I have no pictures at this time, but I promise to bring some next time. And
You
I do
only
want
have
to
pictures
thank,
of bad things anyway.
No, I had pictures of good things,
Okay.
of things that were accomplished. But I want to thank Natalie Martinez. I wouldn't even have a slide if it wasn't for her. Last week in my 7 years was probably the busiest week I've ever had, and I contacted her and said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get my stuff done in time to even have even some talking points. So she put this together for me, so I'm going to talk on these points.
And
I
just
think,
so you know, Dan, like some of us, have been over at Solar Sano anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day,
and we're happy
terribly
to do it.
impacting all our other tasks that we need to get done. So you don't need to apologize for not getting things on this
Okay,
agenda.
well, thank you.
Show me your traffic wave.
It's actually like this.
Each of us,
When I get
each
then
of
it's
us
like
has
that.
our own little routine. We've been.
And how
making
many of
jokes
our
about
schools were
It-
used after the Garlic Festival issue?
Oh,
Quite a
seven.
few,
Exactly.
yeah,
Seven
yeah, quite a
schools.
few.
So
we've had a
been
busy and challenging summer. I'm extremely proud of our group, custodial and maintenance. As BC asked me earlier how the summer went, it was probably our most demanding and craziest, but I'm extremely proud of our group of what they performed and what they got done. There's, I think, 4 or 5 pages of our projected projects and what we completed. We got a lot done this summer.
Yeah, we did.
Within our crew, there's a lot of things on there that aren't even represented just in the way of work orders. We probably processed several hundred work orders over the summer. So I'm extremely proud of our group. And we had a real short, compressed summer. We had to change directions a few times and go as the demands called us, but I am very pleased with what we got done. We tried to do something at every school. The high schools got a little bit more than some of the other schools in some respects, but just a few of the big items that really show. The marquee at Gilroy High, photo finish, it was actually up and running the day before school, and I got to put a big thank you to Maribel and Jose. I did the nuts and bolts part of it. They did the tech, which was much, much needed. They solved a lot of last-minute issues and problems and got that thing fired up and going. So I want a special thank you to them. The stadium lights, excuse me. Yes.
Did they have a marquee?
They did. It was not functioning and pretty much an antique. So they do have a nice new marquee. Stadium lights, we did have some issues late in the year, and we had to get, we didn't know what the problems were. We brought out General Lighting. They did repair the lights. It's ready to go for football season. Trying to do that during the school year would have been next to impossible. The track service for both high schools that you approved, both tracks, Christopher and Gilroy High, looked like brand new tracks. That was amazing what the transformation was, just the cleaning and painting at Christopher. Christopher, the gym floor, main gym floor was finished. Looks beautiful. It looks better than I think day one. We did make a promise to get bottle fillers in all our school sites. We were going to uphold that promise, but we ordered all the product July 1st when we had the budget. We thought we'd receive the product within a week. We received it the first week of August. So we have 5 schools that have bottle fillers, including the district office. There's one in the restroom foyer.
Oh, good.
But we will be working along to get these completed as best as possible. Like Dr. Flores said, my plumbers are directing traffic right now twice a day. So that's on their list, and they really want to get this done. They're the ones who really took this initiative to promise that we could do all schools, and we'll get them done. Middle schools, the biggest thing we probably accomplished was South LA Middle School. We had Tremco out there to do some preventative repairs and maintenance. I'll be bringing that to you. That was discussed and recommended to move forward in subcommittee. So that was done over the summer. I'm hoping we get 3 or 4 good years out of that roof now without any big problems. So we're very, very hopeful. They did a lot of work. Elementary schools, all the cafeteria tables were inspected, serviced. Some took some major repairs. We have had some issues last year with some of the lunch tables, so they all were checked and inspected and serviced by qualified service people. A lot of painting throughout all the district, a lot at the elementary schools, a lot of floor replacements that we reached out to all the school sites prior to the end of the year to try to get a grasp of what our flooring needs were going to be and bring it to subcommittee. We did not get a lot of response, but once summer started, we got a lot of requests to look at floors. And we discovered as our custodial teams were out there cleaning that we had a lot of floors to replace. So this was a big summer, and I will be bringing a flooring cost to you as a ratification. Another big one for the elementary, Elliott Sidewalk was replaced with a 50-50 reimbursement by the city. That got changed midsummer of the scope of work, but we did get the majority of the sidewalk on the 3 sides of Elliott replaced, which I'm really happy about. The tree work and the street gutter and whatnot was delayed by the city. That'll be on them at a later time. But overall, it was a very good summer. Our custodial team cleaning, which has been in place for 7 years now, we had the best year ever. We didn't have any photo finishes at the end. We were actually on schedule. All the custodians returned to their site when the teachers did. So very successful year. That's it. Any questions on anything we did or did not do?
Holy cow, you did a lot.
I feel we did a lot.
You tell your team they're awesome.
Thank you.
Really, our district is lucky to have them, and our schools all look great.
Great. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you also, Dan, to you and your team. Often the work that happens, it's behind the scenes work. We see the shiny classrooms when we return, and it's easy to forget who did all that work. So please do convey our thanks to your team.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a big part of our success with the cleaning is the equipment you approved for us and the trainings. And I do have to acknowledge our supervisor, Teofilo Delgado. He did an amazing job. That was his group, and he put all the teams together and did all the scheduling, kept them all on task, and they worked really, really hard. Thank you.
Wow. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So, hey, let's group like items C through F. Do you want to talk about those?
Sure. Saving the best for last. Let's see. We've got.
That's right. Board member reports are coming up.
Oh, that's
right. So go ahead.
Yes. Let's see. So items C, D, E, and F. Item C is our in-plant inspector. This is a contract for our in-plant inspector for the MELIS buildings that are being constructed for us for the Brownell project. Item D is our inspector, Earth Systems Pacific, will be our inspector on site for a lot of our construction, testing, concrete work, and they'll work hand in hand with our IOR. Let's see, item E is another contract with Padre Associates. This is for our remedial action work plan. This is actually to develop a plan with the DTSC to remediate a lot of the areas of concern. They could be leftover pesticides or other elements that we need to remove from the school before we actually demolish that old section. So there's a plan that needs to be developed in conjunction with the DTSC. Padre is our chosen contractor to actually get that done. And then the last is, let's see, a contract with Hollister Moving and Storage. This is to move some of the elements out of the B and C building. A note about this, I did some investigating. When we did the GECA lab, I know there's a question about this particular contract. We did the GECA lab. We did a walk for movers, a site walk to evacuate that lab and then store all that material. We noted that Hollister Moving was the only company that showed up. There was another one of the same size, also out of Hollister. I think it was S&M Moving. Just point of clarification, we don't have too many movers in this area that are willing to sign a contract such as the districts, it's mostly for the insurance carriage. So that's why Hollister ends up being one of the contractors that we use most.
Great. Board, do you have any questions, comments, or discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion for items 7C through F.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Good luck figuring out who the second was. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, what you've all been waiting for, board member reports. Board, do you have anything to report?
Nope.
All right. Trustee Doyle.
I was able to be at El Roble on opening day, first day of school. And I was surprised how smoothly it went with all the traffic we had out on the different roads.
Always.
Oh, it's horrible. But it was even the kindergartners lined up right and went into.
Nice.
And a lot of the parents are learning they can park over on the other side on Wren and walk through the park in, so it eased up a little bit. But all in all, it was a very good opening day.
Wonderful. Trustee Vyak?
I met with a unit from the probation department, and what I found out, it's a newly formed unit about a year, and they're going to actually have a probation officer housed at JPD a couple of days a week, and they're purely prevention. So they're looking for referrals from the schools for students that aren't like in trouble or anything, but may need extra support because they want to do a lot of this pro-social activities to keep them on the right track and keep them busy. So just wanted to let the district know about it.
I think we heard that yesterday. Right?
Yeah, we did.
Or Tuesday,
Yeah.
whatever day it was, at the youth probation. is
Yesterday.
represented on
Yeah.
the South County Youth Task Force.
Perfect.
Did you get a name?
I know his name is Pat. I don't know the last name. So Morgan Hill is going to be assigned a probation officer, and Gilroy will be.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
I love it.
But I'm happy to send you his name if you want.
That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Very good.
Yeah.
Trustee Diaz?
I was at Christopher High for the first day, but dropping off my daughter and my wife. Actually, my wife didn't go because she was had a bad back, so she was out for the first week. For the first time in 20-some years, she's never missed the first day of school.
Wow.
And she finally made it back this past Monday, and she's been easing into it. But I was there on their Friday night, chaperone their back-to-school movie night. They watched Shazam, a newer version of it. It wasn't Shaquille O'Neal. I thought it was going to be Shaquille O'Neal.
Were you disappointed?
I was a little bit. Yeah. But that was fun. The kids were really well behaved. I mean, it was a really hot day, and it started at 7 p.m. By 9 p.m., it was down to 60 degrees, and people were cold and huddled up. And so they had popcorn and all kinds of really good stuff. They also did these back to Gilroy Strong, and had a moment of silence as well at the school, and it was really well attended and really respectful and really amazing. And just a question I had was, have we had any indication of when Christmas Hill will open up again? And you may not know.
I just talked to the city administrator yesterday or the day before. They don't have a date yet, but as soon as they can open it, they will. In fact, we have a meeting this week. All the cross-country coaches, myself, Deb, and Gabe and some of his staff to talk about how we're going to deal with the cross-country meets, which should start right after Labor Day. So we're going to work through that at a meeting, I think, Tuesday. But right now, they're not indicating the date. We hope it's sooner than later because obviously it's having impacts on Solar Sano and Gilroy. Highs traffic, big time. But now we have other impacts like the cross-country meets. And they're actually pretty big impacts. Like, for instance, if we had to move Gilroy High's invitational meet, it would cost a lot of money to move it to Toro or somewhere else. So we're hoping that by the middle of September it'll be open, but we don't have a date right now.
Trustee Pisano.
I just because of my former life as a principal, I never go to schools on the first day of school. I figure principal is the last person they want to see as a board member on the first day of school. So I visited the two principals of my schools. So my schools are ADB and South Valley. And I had a really nice visit with Guillermo Ramos, the new principal at South Valley, and he asked some very interesting questions. And one of the things he asked me was, he's done a little research on me, which kind of worried me, but I said, and what did you find out? So he asked, he says, well, I understand that you're interested in a pool at South Valley. I said, yes, and he said, is that in any way going to put back the project of redoing South Valley? And I loved that he asked that because already he is taking ownership of that site. And I said, well, of course it will. And he looked at me. I said, no. I said, the very first responsibility I have as a board member is to South Valley. I said, so don't worry. And I just thought that was a really neat question for him to ask. I was really thrilled that he asked that. And I got a really good vibe off of him. And I went to see Velia Kodaga. And I'm glad that you went to see the staff today before the board meeting, because that was her number one thing, is the ambiguity of not knowing was very stressful to them. So Velia said ADB. Yeah, she said they would do whatever they needed to do. They were okay. They just wanted to know.
Right. She's been very professional about
Yes.
this. I'm proud of her.
Me too.
All right. Let's see. I went to 2 Rucker back-to-school nights, one for kindergartners, one for everyone else, and everything looks real good. The kindergartners come in, they know what they're doing, and the process works. Also, on the first day of school, I went to Gilroy High, Christopher High, and Rucker. And Gilroy High registration, I got to be part of that, and there's some surly parents, including me, but Deb's not here, so I can't apologize to her. But the process is all working. Met all the principals, and they're excited about the new year. So things are looking real good in our district, given where we are. So that concludes the board member reports. Next, we have upcoming and new referral agenda items. Anybody have anything they want to?
If the board members don't, I'd like to bring up a conflict.
Okay.
And ask,
Yes, please.
Ask for your advice. So, every year we go to the Santa Clara County Office of Ed Teacher Recognition event.
Thank you.
And this year, for whatever reason, it's on a Thursday night. I still don't believe that, but that's what they've got posted,
print.
which is a board meeting night. So we usually many of us go to that event. So, we tossed around the idea of, do we change a board meeting, or do we just ask that a couple board members and a couple cabinet members go, because the rest of us will need to be here for the board meeting? And I know that we have at least one board member gone on October 3rd, so then that puts us down low for the board meeting.
I'm here on the 3rd.
Are you here on the 3rd?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm not
Anybody
here
else
for the
not here
second
on the
board
3rd?
meeting.
Are we talking about
October
3rd. So that's usually it's on a Monday night. I don't really understand why they moved it to a Thursday. So
Hard for us.
we've got a conflict. So I don't know. Should we just have 1 or 2 board members go to that instead of the board meeting?
Why don't we just call them up, say Gilroy Strong, change it back to Monday?
What's the repercussion of moving our board meeting to either the 2nd or the 4th?
That's up to you. That's why I'm bringing it up under
Wednesday or Friday?
under
That's
this.
what you're suggesting?
Are we having anybody recognized?
Oh, yeah.
Always.
Yes.
We always have a teacher.
Yeah. All right. So Friday's not happening. That's what I just
Okay,
heard.
Friday's out.
I guess
And just to let you know, I'm not here the rest of the month.
Yes.
I leave on the 5th
Yep.
and come back on the
But we should
28th or
wear it as
29th.
the 3rd.
Not that I'm really all that important.
I definitely saw it on the 3rd in multiple places.
So do you want to move it to Wednesday?
Okay, let's start with Do we want to move the board meeting to accommodate this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Most of us go.
Right. So we have a consensus on that. So then, where do we move the meeting to? Wednesday, October 2nd. Looks okay for me.
How is that for staff getting the board?
We'll just have a condensed timeline for our reports and getting the agenda.
Looking at, is there anything
Although
on
the
that?
agenda has to be done by Friday.
School
Friday,
presentations.
it doesn't matter.
SIPSAs.
SIPSAs.
Whatever they are now.
Yeah, we know.
So.
Well, we would just
start
let
in
the
the second?
principals know that they're moved up a night.
sorry.
I'm sure they'll be well.
Is that onerous to those principals?
And how they're going to spend their time so they come and.
I don't know what
Okay.
it is.
All right.
Who's that night, Kathleen?
Middle schools, all three of
Middle
them.
schools, all three? I'm, with this much notice, I'm sure we can do it.
These are the schools that.
Mark won't be able to make the 2nd.
All schools, okay.
You can't, were you going to be here on the 3rd?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Single plan?
Why don't we just have a few board members
Go.
and
Well, I heard a quorum on moving, right? Do we?
I'm sorry, did October 2nd? does it-
Mark can't make the 2nd.
Okay.
So what are our other options? Okay. We can move on without Mark, which would be
We
sad.
could do a week
I would be
later.
sad, but I'd make it somehow.
Would a week later work?
Well,
Then you start running
I
into
know, then we have two board meetings in a row, but we can
10th and 17th.
I can
can't
do it.
make it then.
Okay, that doesn't work.
The first work?
It's too soon for.
not for me.
Do the first.
First?
Yeah, it's a holiday
I can do the
for me.
first few there.
Can't do second, first.
We really can't talk to the county office of education because it's kind of ridiculous.
Because it's
Well,
32 districts and they've already,
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to change for one.
already posted it.
I imagine there's some school boards that meet on Mondays who have been complaining for decades, right?
That's what I'm wondering happened. That's what
why we're
I'm guessing happened. So we don't have a date.
All right. So
Want to go back to the plan of one or two board members going
Yeah.
and one or two
That makes
cabinet
the most
members?
sense.
Yeah,
okay.
we'll just, try to have a light agenda.
Who wants to go to a fun party and who wants to go to Campbell?
Who
I
are
want to
the,
go. I want to go.
which schools? Which schools are?
Which school has the teacher? Who's our teacher?
Which schools are presenting on the 3rd?
I'll find
Shame
out.
on you all.
I know, that's terrible. I'll find out. Melanie could tell me in a minute, but I'll find out which school it is and maybe that board member
Right.
can go.
That makes sense.
This board member is.
Well, which school is presenting on the 3rd?
all
Oh,
three
the middle schools.
Which schools are presenting their SIPSAs on the
all
3rd?
three
Middle schools.
All three middle schools. Okay. Then I'd like to stay
Yes.
since it's one of my schools.
Jennifer Evans,
She's
right?
Rod Kelly.
Oh, which is my school.
That's your school.
There you go. So you just stay. Look at you. You stay in San Jose.
I feel bad that I won't be there.
Perfect. Done.
So it's the, what's the second?
We'll have to
No,
just.
we're staying on the 3rd.
Oh, we said the third?
Yeah.
Now with the SIPSAs, and it's in Campbell.
Starts like at 6,
That would-
and we usually get home at 10:30 or 11. It's a
Yeah.
long event.
Probably 11 p.m. we start.
Okay, so two board members will go.
Oh, yeah.
I thought I mentioned it.
Cabinet members.
I'd like to go if no one else does.
And you're up in that area already?
You two
All
are.
right, that makes sense.
Okay. Makes sense. All right.
Drive south.
Okay. So the meeting stays on October 3rd. We will be down 2 board members, the SIPSAs.
And 2 cabinet members, so
Two
we'll have to
cabinet-
plan the agenda around that too.
Okay. You guys Rochambeau for it. Okay. Thank you. Announcements. The next regular meeting of the Board of Education will be held on Thursday, September 5th. Closed session at 5 o'clock, followed by study session at 6 o'clock. What are we studying? With school presentations, Christopher High and Gecka. Okay. And then regular meeting at 7. The agenda will be posted. We are adjourned.